Hey friends, welcome back to the Church Planting Podcast. I'm Greg Nettle and I serve as president of Stadia, where we believe that every person on the planet deserves to have access to a thriving, growing, multiplying church. Today on this episode, we have Toni McEwan, an amazing woman who has helped companies scale, launch products, launch other companies all around the world. Toni's going to be talking with us about strategy, execution, and all things business that translate into the church planting and church leadership world. Let's welcome Toni McEwan to the Church Planting Podcast. Hey friends, I'm here with a good friend, Toni McEwan, who's an amazing business leader with more than 20 years of experience in the business world. And she's joining us to talk about the importance of strategy, not only in the business world, but how does it translate into church world, and especially church planting world. Toni, welcome. It's so good to have you with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Greg.
Hey, Toni, let's talk about just kind of some of your story. Give us some of your background. What led you into the business world? What did you do in the business world?
Yeah, so I spent nearly 2 decades working for a global publicly traded company. And I think it started when I was 10 years old and my dad was teaching me how stocks worked in the Wall Street Journal. I've always had an appetite and a curiosity for leadership and for how people work together to accomplish, and missions organization at the most tiny level of detail to a very bird's eye view as well. So I have worked across many countries, many different industries. I started my career with Dow Chemical, and that led me all over the US and even all over the world. I got to spend 4 years leading the UK and Ireland agriculture division from 2013 to 2017, and have just been really grateful to do things like marketing, sales, strategy, and just global product development and leadership and HR even in my career.
Toni, I was kind of amazed. So the company, what was the size of the company? And you were over an enormous budget.
Yeah, so I guess it all depends about perspective, but the company has been anywhere from 15 to 20,000 people, and over the last 20 years. And the division I was a part of, most recently, the agriculture division, was 14 billion, Corteva Agriscience. So I was not responsible for all of that, but I would say I've had responsibility for teams anywhere from 20 people to 100, and revenue sizes of, $75 million to $300 million, depending on the product or the portfolio I was managing at the time.
Yeah. So when we talk about perspective, okay, for those of us in ministry world, those are monster numbers. And so you have a lot of experience in this kind of phase of the industry. Toni, you have worked with strategy at enormous levels, from smaller endeavors to much, much larger endeavors. How important is strategy when you're launching? You've launched new products, you even launched new businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Greg, strategy is everything. I think one of the key learnings I've had about strategy is you've got a plan, but you've also have to be very flexible and agile. And so what I mean by that is, we can all sit around a room and put together the best set of slides or the best document on a piece of paper, and with all the full intentions that it's all going to go exactly to plan. But the best, I think, leaders who manage strategy well have the ability to be agile and flex as and when needed. And obviously, we've all learned how to do that quite significantly in the last 18 months. But for me, going into a new venture, whether it's a church plant, whether it's a new church campus, whether it's a new ministry, or launching a new organization without a strategy can be a little bit dangerous, not just in terms of the likelihood of success, but also the ability to get your real key team members to align and follow what you intend to do as a leader.
Okay, so there's just amazing stuff here to unpack. So the idea of having strategy in place but being agile. My gosh, that sounds exactly like church planting, church world, right?
Yeah.
But Toni, let's just talk about this strategy in place. Where do you start?
It's a great question. I remember when I was leading my team in England, we flipped the room around. I got everybody in the room together, and we were in a pretty old conference room and very kind of stuck in our ways of doing things. And so I literally had everyone stand up and turn the room around and put the projector on the wall where there was no screen. And I said, we're going to start with a blank sheet of paper. Wow. Because I think in that instance for me, and I think it can be true of church planting world, we all bring experiences and skill sets and past organizational complexities into the new thing. But sometimes those can be biased and they can lead us down paths just that this is the way we've always done it. So for me, I've always started with a blank sheet of paper and really started with, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What does success look like at the end of this, 1 year period, 3 year period? These days, I think it's hard to think 5 years down the road, right? But starting with kind of the vision, the ultimate likelihood of success, putting that on a piece of paper with a team, and then from there kind of backing up, okay, so how do we get there from where we are today? And what are those achievable big milestones? A lot of people talk about big rocks these days to get us from where we are today to what we want to accomplish in 1, 2, or 3 years, or whatever that time frame should be.
So Toni, we talk a lot about mission, vision, and values, and we work hard on all of that, right? But the strategy portion, okay, let's say we're starting, a new business endeavor, church plant, new church, whatever. How long should we expect to spend, putting together a very concise and workable strategy?
That's a great question, Greg. I think it depends on the team dynamic. And so one of the key pieces to success, I think, is having an alignment to vision. And so if you've got a team that's really well aligned and bought in at the very beginning, I think it can go quite quickly. Maybe that's 2 days in a room together. But if you start to, as a leader, kind of sense that you've got some more work to do here, and not everybody is seeing the thing the same way, one strategy to handle that is just to give everybody an opportunity to voice their concerns, do a little bit of a pre-mortem. What could go wrong here? What risks do you think we should take? And so that, that could take several workshops, over a couple days, over a month or 2 period of time. I think it really depends on how fast do you want to move, how aligned the team is, and really ultimately whether or not everyone has had a chance to voice, their perspective and their opinion. I think one of the biggest risks with strategic planning is, you get in a room and the leader who has the influence and the power just based on their title, starts to really drive and just moves. And you've got people sitting around the table who aren't saying anything, and yet, have really valid concerns or points to raise. They want to be part of the process. And you get to the end of the thing and it's like, well, that's that one leader's vision, not actually the other 10 to 15 people in the room. And I think that can be a risk because it's very difficult to execute in a strategy that not everyone's aligned and bought into.
Okay, so these days, Toni, some of us know a lot about how to develop strategy, but even with Stadia, with our organization, we typically will bring in a facilitator to help work us through strategy and so forth. I'm thinking back to when I planted my first church, and man, I didn't have a clue about how to write strategy. Stadia wasn't around at that point to help or anything like that. So how important is it, would you suggest, for someone to bring an outside facilitator in or to have someone who's skilled at doing this?
Yeah. My husband works at our home church. We were just having this conversation around, do you facilitate your own team or do you bring some outside perspective in? And my experience has taught me the temptation is to go ahead and facilitate it yourself. Because, you know what needs to get done. You might even have 60 or 70% of an idea of where you want the thing to end up, right? I would always, if you can afford it, or you can find somebody like a business leader in your church who actually does this for a living and is willing to donate their time, I would always advise having an outside perspective come in and facilitate. Two reasons. One, I think it provides an opportunity for you as the leader to really be part of the process rather than driving your own agenda. Even if you don't think you have an agenda, you aren't biased towards an agenda, it takes away the curiosity or the question of the other team members as to whether or not you're really driving this or whether someone else is. But secondly, I think it allows and it fosters just this kind of organic, natural connection and relationship where like you're all kind of making the thing together. And I think there's beauty in that.
I think that's such a very valid point about the idea of it's really difficult to facilitate and participate in the design of strategy. And that's one of the reasons we always like to bring someone from the outside in. Now, back to your point, though, what do you think there are business leaders out there that would be willing to help, let's say in church planting world?
Oh, no question. I think the key is, finding the ones that have a vested interest in your church, that have the skill set, and frankly, just want to be asked. I think, I mentioned we've moved many times across the country. We lived overseas. We've been a part of many different types of churches, different denominations even. And always have chosen, knowing that home may not be our permanent home for the next 5 to 10 years. But my husband and I were always intentional to say, we're going to go all in this church community as if we're never leaving, because God can use us in some way. And I think the biggest thing that I've appreciated is when I've actually been asked. I've gotten to know someone on staff or a church leader. They've just said, hey, tell me about what you do. And then, hey, what would you be willing to? And, all you have to do is ask. So I think certainly, you got to manage schedules and time. And I think the other consideration there is just being prepared, right? Like giving that business leader a little bit of a heads up that this, you might want some of their time. They're pretty busy people, right? We all have busy schedules. So not doing it the week before, the day before is also just a consideration. But absolutely, there's got to be a willingness to do it together.
Okay, so this is amazing. As a church member, you're saying the thing you most appreciated was simply being asked. So I just can't, we have to just, underscore that over and over and over again. And here's the deal, business leaders are busy people. You're right. But the reason they're busy is because they get things done. Mm-hmm. And I've found that business people, if it's a significant task that they're being asked to invest in the ministry, they're kind of excited about being part of it and will joyfully participate. So Toni, I want to, there's strategy, but there's also pitfalls of strategy that I'm sure you've kind of had to navigate over your career. Talk about a few of the pitfalls that we as leaders need to avoid.
Yeah. I think these are going to feel very fresh. A key success of strategy is having the long-term vision that's big enough and loose enough so that as things evolve and change, we talked about being agile and agility, that you can adjust. But keeping that long-term vision is critical. The pitfall, I think there, Greg, is when the long-term vision keeps changing and it changes too quickly. And so what I mean by that is you don't actually allow the strategy to take root. And I've seen this in my own experience, both sides of this. One scenario is the long-term vision is cast and it's almost so set in concrete in stone that the church, the organization, the culture becomes irrelevant because something that was set, 5, 10, 15 years ago was relevant at that point in time, but it's not anymore. It's not reaching the lost. It's not accomplishing whatever, that campus and that community wanted to do in that particular neighborhood. But at the same point in time, if your strategy and your vision pivots too quickly, so we've all had to learn to adapt daily, right, through COVID. But if you've set something in place and your team at the top level and your mid-level and your more junior team members are just now kind of starting, it's going to take time for that vision to catch, that execution to happen in the organization. And if you're kind of 3 or 6 months in and you're like, hey, this isn't working, we're going to scrap this whole thing and we're going to go from 90 degrees to 180, that can be really jarring for an organization because it feels like the strategy is changing when in fact the strategy might be the same. Your tactics are changing, but your team doesn't necessarily understand why you're changing. And so
so hold on. This is so important. Talk to us about the difference between strategy and tactics.
Yeah. So strategy is really, those, 3, 5, 7 key imperatives of big things that you want to accomplish. And the way I look at tactics are these kind of mini bite-sized things that you're going to do to support those 3, 5, 7 objectives. And so, the same can be true of organizational planning and goals, right? Each of us kind of set out the year and say, okay, these are the maybe 5 big things I want to get done. But underneath those 5 things, you've got, anywhere from 3 to 10 bite-sized tactical things you've got to do, right? And the same is true for strategy. So if you set out kind of 5, 7 strategic objectives, your team, whether that's in a ministry team, whether that's an operational team, they're going to think about, okay, how am I going to get that done? And what are the specific things I need to do today to accomplish that objective, right? And when that objective at the top changes too quickly, the team members are saying, well, wait, I've been working on this specific program or this specific content or this specific video aligned to this objective. Now, is that relevant anymore? Am I still supposed to be doing that? And it can create a bit of confusion around what the purpose is of the work that people are just doing day to day to support the objective.
Okay, so when we're making a shift, what kind of time frame? I hate to do that to you, but is it 3 months? Is it a year? I mean, how do you turn the ship, I guess?
Change management is key. So I think you know your organization and you know how quickly they are to adapt. Some can move very quickly. If you're managing and your whole organization is a team of 5 to 20 people in your church plant, you can probably turn the ship pretty quickly and get everybody on board, month, 2, 3 months. But if you've got, let's say anywhere from 3 to 4 layers of your organization, it's going to take some time. Because through that change management process, you as an executive leadership team might all align, hey, this is the right thing to do. We were going hard left. Now we're going to go a hard right. But at the end of the day, probably the 20 people under your executive team, they've got to get aligned. I'm just picking numbers. And the other 100 or 200 also need to kind of get aligned. So for them, it might take 3, 6, 9 months. I think we have all learned how to adapt more quickly. And as long as there's clarity and vision from the top as to why change happens, I think it can happen quicker. But if it's not well communicated, if it's not well understood, and it's not well bought in by that layer underneath your executive team, I think it can really be detrimental and slow the process down.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is, as leaders, we better be able to articulate in a very crystal clear fashion, let's say with our close team, whatever that looks like, elders, executive team, whatever it is, that has to be crystal clear before we start making some kind of a shift.
Yeah, and I think one of the other pitfalls there, Greg, is that some leaders may want to get buy-in and make sure everybody's okay with the change. And I think there's a sweet spot of listening for feedback, letting people feel heard and speak into that. But, in any leadership role or decision, you're never going to have 100% consensus. And so if you wait for everybody to be okay with it before you move, that's going to slow it down. On the other hand, if you move without letting people have a say or letting people be heard or not clearly articulate the vision, I think that's a risk too. So you've got pitfalls on other sides. So I think it's a sweet spot of finding the right balance of being available, listening well, taking the feedback, adjusting, but then knowing when to go and knowing that you might only ever get 80% buy-in.
Okay, so you and your husband have been part of numerous churches over the years, and you've always gotten involved, like you said, like you're going to be there forever. Give us some observations from your experience with churches when it comes to strategy.
You know, it's interesting. I don't think I realized there was a strategy side of church world until more recently, until probably the last handful of years where I've been able to see a little bit more behind the curtain. I think so. An observation as a church member is that you can see where church members can sense and feel where there's alignment amongst the leadership team in an organization, in a church. That can be felt in the congregation. I guess more importantly to that point is it can be felt more clearly when there isn't that alignment. So what I mean by that is when you've got an executive or a leadership team in a church, whether it's a church of 40 people or a church of 4,000 people, and your core leaders that are serving and that are visible from the platform and are, involved in the congregation, when they are in health and in strong relationship with one another, it's felt in the congregation, and it's rocking and rolling. And so whether that's a strategy or whether that's just health of organizational cultural alignment, the opposite is also true. You can start to see and sense and feel that tension. And so I know we're talking about strategy here, Greg, but for me, a lot of this goes back to just culture and people, and how you execute that strategy well is based on a healthy organizational culture at all layers of the church. And as a volunteer and a lay leader, same is true, right? So if I am serving on kids ministry and I'm getting very specific, clear instructions from the kids ministry leader about, hey, we're going to change service times. We're going to need you to help out more at this service. We're a little light over here. And then I go into the service after I've served and I hear a very different message from the platform, or the timing's different. Like there's something to be said there too. Like, well, wait a second. I just heard this from the kids ministry and I'm hearing this from the lead teaching pastor. So I'm not saying that's happening, but when there is a lack of coordination and alignment on strategy, and then that can feel very jarring and very confusing to a volunteer. Again, I'm serving my time. I've got, right, as a church member, I've got other priorities. I've got business commitments and things like that. I'm giving my time to be here. Do you need me here on this day or not? And so I think those are just some very specific examples, but that's where I think it does come down to strategy, communication, and organizational health and alignment amongst your team.
Okay, so Toni, I don't want to leave this. Let's dive into this for just a few moments here. When we talk about culture and team health, because you've been so involved in that, give us just a few tips, if you could. How do we achieve that in our organization?
Yeah. It's very hard to do virtually. I think we've all learned that. I will say, so I've just come off of a role where I led 100 people globally, most of whom I never met in person because it was all through the pandemic. So team in India, team in Spain, team in Mexico City, and team across the US. And I think whether it's in a business context or a church plant or a church organizational context, those relational, hey, how's your day going? How's your weekend? Those relational touch points in the hallway, those casual conversations where it's not just task focused, the relational equity that you build with your team will speak volumes in your ability to drive strategy and change. And so if you don't invest in the relationships, and let's be clear, like if you're planning a church and you've got 5 to 10 people, it's a lot easier to invest in 5 to 10 people. If you've got an organization of 200 plus, it is more difficult. But you've probably got a few leaders who report to you that you need to invest in. And if you role model that relational capital and your intention is pure, and it's not just, I want to get to know you so that you will do these things for me, but you role model that, you invest in them, then they're going to in turn do that for their team and the people that report to them, because it sets a tone of what cultural health and how valuable people are for the entire organization. So COVID has made it hard. I'm not going to lie. I think where there was strong relational equity to begin with, that probably got a little bit strained. Where there was no relationship, you're doing it over a screen. So I think as we start to evolve back to, whatever version of in-person or virtual and in-person, depending on what organization or church looks like, don't underestimate the amount of extra effort it's going to take to rebuild, invest in that relationship on the front end. And I think what I've learned is that if I do it on the front end, it pays off dividends on the back end. When I don't do it on the front end and I just start driving, it's a lot harder to eventually repair that relationship, or not even repair because it's broken, but just to invest in it after you have it on the back end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stadia is 100% virtual. So this is how we build equity and so forth. And so it can be done because I believe our culture and team health is just fantastic. But we also recognize the importance of occasionally getting together in person. And it all does build that team equity and culture of health. Toni, I want to shift gears now just for a moment. So as our listeners and viewers can tell, obviously, you're a female business leader. And I want to talk about your church experience because, Stadia, we believe in gift-based ministry, not gender-based ministry. So we're fully empowering of women in leadership, church planting, and so forth. What's been your experience as a female involved in church?
Oh, gosh. I will say it's varied depending on, the state we were living in, the country we were living in, the church we were attending. What's unique about our family situation is that I have always been the primary financial provider for our family, which is very countercultural in big C church world. And so for 20 years, even 20 years ago, when we would show up on a Sunday and, I'd be more inclined to be on the host team. My husband would be more inclined to do kids ministry because he was just more gifted that way, and eventually became a stay-at-home dad when we had our daughter after 4 years of being married. People didn't quite know what to do with us sometimes. We were in a great, when we did ministry together and in couples ministry and things like that, it seemed quote easier. But when I would really step out into my gifting as like a life group coach, and I was one of the only females, or he was one of the only males in kids ministry, I think it took people aback. But over time, I think there's definitely more openness to it. One of my favorite conversations I had in the last 3 years was I got invited in to a conversation with our executive pastor who was looking at the gender leadership quote policy, for lack of a better term, for our church, and biblically looking at what the church should earmark as its stance on, complementarian versus egalitarian. And I got invited into that conversation to give a perspective as a female church member, but also as a female business leader. And the fact that I got to shape and help just prayerfully and honestly share my own experiences in the business world, but also in my church and my home church, was really cool because I felt like there was an openness just to even listen. And that's evolved. So I've seen, quite a change in the last 20 years. And I think the key here is, I love what you talked about, Greg, at Stadia about, gift-based leadership. I think there's a very solid conversation happening right now amongst the broader church in this state. And it's encouraging to me. I think it's just going to continue to create more openness because God's created us all uniquely and gifted us all many parts of one body, and gender is just one piece of that. So the more we can really hone in and really pull out and celebrate our unique giftedness, I think the more the body of Christ, the more the kingdom grows.
Yeah, I think it would just be a tragedy, Toni, for your gifting to be lost in the church. Yeah. And so I am delighted that you're part of a church now that celebrates gifting and is fully embracing your unique contribution. Toni, we always end with 3 questions that I ask. Here's the first one. What do you wish pastors would do more of?
Be available.
What do you wish pastors would do less of?
Worry less about their online profile.
And finally, when has been a time when a pastor has, just done something especially important, made an impact in your life?
Quite recently, I'm going through a pretty significant career transition, and our lead pastor gave me 30 minutes and just said, "Hey, how can I help? What can I do to support you, and what's top of mind?" And it was just the fact that he was willing to give me 30 minutes of his time just made me feel seen and appreciated as a female business leader in our church family.
Okay, this is a significant change, Toni. You're heading to one of my favorite ministries, Slingshot Ministries, a Stadia partner. I just love Monty and Stan, the leaders, and all of the slingers. What's your role going to be with them?
Yeah, so I'm going to be serving the nonprofit partners where we do executive search and coaching and come alongside faith-based nonprofits. And so really excited after, like I said, 20 years of working for a global public company to serve the kingdom and use my leadership skills in a different capacity. And the Slingshot Group and the team is just fantastic. I've never seen such a healthy culture, and I'm grateful to be part of it.
Okay, so in a nutshell, tell us what Slingshot does.
So we work with churches and with nonprofits to find talent and leaders, help them as they think about succession planning, career transitions, find next level people. And we also do coaching and some succession planning as well. And we do it on a national basis. So
yeah,
feel
it's
free
amazing.
To check it out.
Slingshot's best there is. And I was walking with a senior pastor of a megachurch yesterday, a good friend, and he said that today his most challenging thing he's facing right now is finding staff in roles and stuff. And so I'm so glad he's hooked up with Slingshot. Toni McEwan, thank you, and God bless you in your new role.
Same to you, Greg. Thank you.